have been allocated as a black area. Now there's another word which you often hear people using, and that is a squatter camp or a shanty town. Now that means that people are living in an area where it is not being officially proclaimed as a residential area. It is an informal settlement. So people have built their own shacks, making simple structures using wood and tin sheet and cardboard and plastic, and it's in many parts of the world simply referred to as a slum. In South Africa they don't use that word slum very much. They refer to informal settlement areas or squatter camps. Now, to make it more complicated, technically speaking in South Africa now, there are no official townships anywhere, because that era of discriminating and dividing towns and cities up into suburbs for blacks and suburbs for brown people and suburbs for Asian people and suburbs for white people, that's all gone. That's all over. You can now move and live where you like, providing you got the money to do it. So of course there's a long sort of, you could call it a hangover from the previous era, from the old South Africa. Just because the law changes doesn't mean everybody's going to suddenly move house. The rich people certainly don't want to go and live in the poor area. The poor people might want to live in the rich area, but they can't afford to, most of them. But there are many other people in between who may have been allocated to a district of a city which was, let's say, a black area, where generally speaking the people have less income, and they have worked hard and saved cleverly and they've got the money. Now that the legislation has changed and they may move wherever they like, because they have the money, they might choose to make that move. So it's not just about the classification of your race and the area in which you live. Remember, these are also communities. If you've grown up in an area and you know everybody and many of your family members live in that area, even if you have the money and it's rather nice to think, oh, I'll go and live to a slightly better area, you might be losing your community. So some people, for those reasons, may have decided, well, I'll stay where I am, I'll just improve the quality of my house, I'll build on it or something like that. So we are trying to describe everybody in just a few sentences, and of course it's impossible because everyone is an individual and it's different. Okay, so just a quick reminder, we went over it quickly the other day, but now it's really applicable to our visit this morning. The legislative cornerstones of the apartheid regime from decades ago, they had to do it according to the law, so they had to make the laws to make this discrimination work according to the government ideology. The Population Registration Act meant that by law every child born in this country had to be registered shortly after birth, and it was at that time that the race of the child would be determined by the government officials of the apartheid government. And this would be your blessing or your curse for the rest of your life, from the cradle to the grave. And it would determine where you were permitted to live, to work, to travel, etc. The Group Areas Act, which was the act of parliament which determined which districts of every single town and city in this country were allocated to be for different racial groups. So if you came to a city where you were even allowed to sleep just for one night would be determined by the color of your skin. If you were an Indian and you were traveling through South Africa 35 years ago and you happened to get to the end of the day in the central city of Bloemfontein, which is 1,000 kilometers north of here, you had made a very serious mistake, because under apartheid, Indians were not allowed to stay there at all, ever. Can you believe that? That's in our lifetimes. So that's how extreme it was. It's all gone now. But part of what we see all around us, the day-to-day landscape of South Africa, is the result of apartheid. And so many South Africans of all colors are sick of hearing about, oh, apartheid, apartheid. But the fact is, it will take us generations still to shake it all off and work it out of our system. Okay, so that's the Group Areas Act. It determines where you may live and stay. And then there's the Influx Control Act. Now this is of particular interest because part of that legislation led to the establishment in the South African population of the rule that every single individual had to have identification documents. Now the age that we live in today around the world, any country, with terrorism and international travel so easy, everybody has ID documents and nobody bats an eyelid about it. But 50 years ago, in Africa, it was revolutionary that every single person, not just wealthy people who are traveling internationally, but everybody. You walk down the street and the police will just catch your eye and they just say, papers. And you must immediately produce the papers. And from the papers, your life story is there in front of them. If anything is wrong or out of place, you're arrested immediately. And you will be detained. And if necessary, if the authorities determine it, you will be forcibly repatriated to your allocated area, even if it's at the northern end of the country. So every laborer, especially the black laborers, the workers, had to have these papers. And they hated them, as you can understand. It was the sharp end of the apartheid instrument of discrimination. And they made a nickname for them. They call them the Dompas. In Afrikaans, the word Dom means stupid. And the Pas, you can understand what they call it. So this was a very important working part of this machine of discrimination. So the visit that we're going to make this morning, we will, I'm certain, hear at some or other time something to do with the issues I have just laid out to you in a very broad way, on purpose. Because the standard routine, when a group like us does a tour in a township, we always get on a step-on guide. It'll be a black guide who comes from this area, or at least knows it very well, better than I could. And it will be he or she who will conduct the proceedings whilst we are here for the morning. So I will take a back seat, you might be happy to hear. So you see how the housing has changed from that very fancy part of town where you guys are living? Langa was the first formally established black township in Cape Town. And it's over 100 years old. And the first black men, not their families and their wives, just the men, were brought here from the Eastern Cape to work on the docks in the harbour, to do the heavy loading. And they would have been transported in and out as their labour was required. This was the whole broad concept of apartheid. The white government determined that most of the country should be under the immediate and direct control of the white government, and they would use the black labour where it suited them, move them in and move them out. They pioneered a nation of commuters, and by allocating their various areas for various races, they forced people to undertake long commutes every day of their life to go and work in what might be classified as white areas, and when the work was finished at the end of the day, go all the way back to the allocated area where they were permitted to live. Very inefficient, expensive, inhumane, and completely unacceptable by any modern standards. Okay, so here on the right we can see what has replaced what used to be an informal settlement area, and in other instances places where hostels were established. But I don't want to poach onto our step-on guides. No, it's not. Go on, it's just too early. Too early. We'll go join our step-on guide shortly.
우리 너희도 이렇게 Huh?
I'm left.
Enjoy listening to go back and listen. Really, I want to know more about. I come without knowing. I want to know more African culture.嗰啲係要自我去嘅兩我呢我知道乜白係Look at the so clean. Considerably clean, much cleaner than Malaysia. Consider slum. Okay, I think the country more on the Hugo Horaza Langa Libali
How long will it be?
Alright, so quite shortly we'll get to the community center, but please remain seated. I will go in and find our step-on guide, and then we will take it from there. So you just remain in the vehicle for the moment, please.
$20 cheeseburger.
Okay, while Mark going to look for the step-on guide, so few things I'd like to highlight to every one of you. Later on, when we go down for the Langa experience, for all your bags, I'll appreciate that you leave it inside the bus. I will to lock it up. Because during the activities, and some of the activities, you really have to put your bags down. Hey, you cannot go football with your bags on, with your bags with you, right? And then the other thing is we have some handicraft, sushi painting, sushi plate painting, all right? So this plate painting